Welcome, everybody, to Let the Journey Begin. I am your host, Hilary Roberts, alongside my co-host, Mr. Merrick Cray, Jason Waller.
Wow. All right, Hilary. Well, yes, welcome back to another episode. Very grateful to be here. As you guys can see, we're in a new spot. We're in our new office. We are slowly... I don't know that it's a good idea that we got swivel chairs. We're both just going to be like this the whole time. But we're here. We wanted to, kick this off, and especially since we're going to be diving into Hilary's story today, which we have not heard. We figured we'd come into the new office, and we'd break the grounds here.
Yeah, but somebody's going to have before we talk about me, which is
all you want to talk about.
Exactly. No, but tomorrow somebody has 2 years sober.
Yeah.
I'm so happy.
2 years. Yeah. It's been really cool to share this experience with you. Because we were connected with
yeah, because you had to come to me and you're like, I got to tell you something that happened. And I already told Ashley, and I cried.
Yeah.
Because I was worried about you. And
yeah, that's right. No, you're absolutely right.
Yeah. Hello.
So we walked through the whole thing. No, look, obviously, you're a huge part of my life and a very dear friend of mine. But just during those times, you just sometimes try to blur things out, And,
it's rough.
But no, very grateful. Life is incredible. Look, shit happens, and life happens, but wouldn't change anything for the world, And I'm so grateful to be, no longer in bondage to drugs and or alcohol
and now no dip.
Yeah, no dip. I'm still on Nicorette, but
that's
no
okay.
dip, and making those strides. But life is literally going phenomenal. My kids are doing amazing. My wife is doing amazing. Our relationship is stronger than it's ever been, even before we first met. And when you go through crazy things, and all great change proceeds through chaos, that is so true, because it's really developed a foundation for us to grow in a much deeper and stronger path together. And there's literally nothing we can't go through. And it's going to be a great testament for us as parents to be able to be there for our kids and help navigate those waters. So
absolutely love
just
it.
Very stoked. But
and then let's talk about our event that we just had.
Very amazing. We just had another event for the foundation, and we did an incredible job. We raised a lot of money. Which is incredible, because we're going to be able to help more people. And, after at the event, we found out that we've given away over $1.2 million in scholarships. So I think it's just the work that's happening. And, Hilary, just wanted to give you thanks and gratitude, for starting this and contributing your own resources, your own finances towards this. And the thousands and thousands of people we've impacted has been incredible, and to see to hear the testimonies from families, and the one specifically that Alex read, it was heartbreaking, but it was also had a phenomenal ending, and it's just really a pleasure to do this work. So I'm grateful that we're able to do it together, and appreciate all the people that support us and support those that are out there that are still fighting and trying to help them heal from their darkness of their past. And we're making that difference. So it's been a couple of years since since the foundation has really taken birth. And I know it's been around for a while, but it's really taken shape specifically this last year. And you've been instrumental in that process. And, so I think it's a really great opportunity for us to get to dive in, and for our audience, for our followers, for contributors, everybody to get to hear more about your story. And how this was even brought to fruition. But let's go back to the beginning. Let's start when Hilary was a itty bitty mitty little redhead running around. And what was it like growing up for you?
Well, my parents. I had an older brother, 5 years older, and I just remember yelling, fighting. My parents did divorce when I was 2.
Who was yelling, fighting?
My parents.
Okay.
And they divorced. And I remember feeling like I had to protect myself. I remember walking 10 blocks to one of our neighbors' houses at 3 years old. And another thing was my brother was getting jumped down the street, and I'm like screaming at these boys. I think my brother would have rather been beat up than have his 3-year-old sister put her hands on her hips and basically say some words that 3-year-olds shouldn't know.
Right.
That I was going to kick their you-know-what's off.
Yeah. Right.
And it wasn't you-know-what's. I knew the words.
Yeah.
My mom, was working. My dad, there wasn't a lot of stability. But I had a babysitter, and she had some teenage sons, and I experienced trauma by different perpetrators, and my first experience was with them, and where they use gasoline on my genitals and just really sick stuff. And,
How old were you?
3. 1 year younger than Delilah. Yeah.
No.
And I remember them laughing while I'm crying and it's hurting. And then the mom was so busy. She had a special needs child, this little girl that had, the father of that daughter had run over his little girl's legs because he didn't see her, or I don't even know.
Where were your parents during? I mean, obviously the nanny was looking after you guys, but I mean, what?
I was at her house, and mom wasn't around, and I didn't even remember that stuff. My mom, again, was trying to do the best she could. I believe my parents loved me, but I was not protected. And later on not believed, which we can talk about. But, and I do want to talk about some of the qualities of my parents because, they really did implement some beautiful things too. So, but my brother was 10 and he was left to watch me. And so I was kind of taken into this guy's place. I didn't know if he was going to let me leave. He made me do things to him. I remember being 5. I remember the incidents and how that affected me sexually later on. And,
so real quick, just to summarize,
kind of jumping around. I'm sorry.
This is good. But there's a lot of, and I really appreciate your vulnerability here. I mean, this has got to be very challenging talking about this. And, but so you, at a young age, 3 years old, is that when your parents separated too?
They separated before that. They divorced by the time I was 2.
Divorced by the time you were 2.
Yeah.
And it's just you and one brother?
Yeah, it was. And then I have a younger half brother, but he came.
But currently right now. So that's down the road,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's you and your brother.
Yeah. And he was like, I loved my brother so much. He was my hero. And, he really didn't want much to do with me.
Right.
But I always wanted to be around him. And he was like, he was my hero. And,
but so you were starting to experience all this type of sexual trauma as a child.
I was. And I did. And, I didn't remember the incident when I was 5 until I was 19. When I was doing some writing with a spiritual advisor, and it freaked me out because it was a male spiritual advisor who was very safe when I was 19, but I couldn't talk about it. It freaked me out. And then I remembered the 3-year-old incident when I was 21, because as you dig deeper, a lot of times it's a child's mind cannot
process.
They can't process it. So it's total disassociation. And then another incident happened at 8, and then another one with my best friend.
How did you get there to remember something when you were 3?
It's at 21, I was in some therapy and I was doing some writing, and I had to write out my life story. I had done that again I had done that at 19. I remember the 5-year-old thing, and I was in therapy and writing out some other stuff, and it just came into my psyche. And I thought I was crazy. And I remember I went with my mom to the house. This was like, I want to say 10 years ago. And we met with her. And I said, I went out back because the garage was gone where the gas cans were. But there wasn't a garage there. And I said to her, there was something else. I said, was there a garage out here? She goes, oh, yeah, that's where we kept the lawnmowers and the gas cans. So I knew I wasn't crazy. I'm like, and then it all, it's very interesting when you have trauma like that. You remember smells, unfortunately, with certain experience, tastes and sounds. There's certain songs, like when I had other traumas and somebody was listening to Led Zeppelin, I couldn't listen to Led Zeppelin for a long time. It's crazy.
So as this kind of progressed, and I want to, because I know this is when you try to unpack a life story, it can get very, there's so many angles to it. And I think it's so important to dive into these things. And I want to hear kind of the full scope of this, but
Sure.
with this child, as a young, innocent child, with the instability, and again, I met your parents, great people, but at the time, again, as like you said, is you weren't protected. And there was dysfunction within the household, right? And there was these things that were happening to you.
And I couldn't understand this because I was in such anger and resentment. And my mother was abused as a little girl. And then my dad, his mother died when he was 3 and his sister was 1.5. She had gotten pneumonia. And this was during World War II. And the kids got chicken pox, and the chicken pox, they were using all the penicillin, all the antibiotics for the war effort, and they couldn't save her. Within 3 days, the chicken pox went in her lungs and killed her. Another thing that happened is my mom, one day decided that she got remarried, and she decided to go on a boat around the world with this guy, and one day decided to move us in with my dad and stepmom, and my dad had anger issues, and I was jealous of my stepmom. She really tried with us and with me. And but in the midst of that, so my dad used to read me Shakespeare. Even though I was scared to death of his temper, he would read me Shakespeare. They introduced me to cuisines. My mom had introduced me to opera and classical. My dad introduced me to blues and jazz. I mean, they were, they're brilliant people, very articulate. I'm so grateful for those different things. I watched musicals. I loved all that stuff. And I went to see the play Annie at age 10, and Mom was out of the country, and I started singing, and I discovered this outlet of singing. And during this time, I also, with my mom, I had been moving different schools. I was in inner city schools. I was embarrassed about my skin tone. I was ashamed of my red hair and my freckles and all that stuff. But I discovered this, and I hated my name. But I could go on that stage or go do those competitions or go do that stuff and not be Hilary. I could be somebody else. And that was my first escape. And my other escape before I discovered drinking was fantasy. I would watch those old movies. And I was very close to my grandparents on my mom's side. And they were married a long time. And I thought, I'm going to meet some great guy. I'm going to save myself for marriage. And he's going to lay his coat in the street. And we're going to dance, do ballroom dancing down the street. And we're going to get married, have kids, have grandkids, and then be like my grandparents and die. Well, I felt like on the same day. My great-grandparents on my mom's side died within 3 weeks of each other. But, so that escape stuff was kind of life-saving. It kind of saved me from being totally crazed all the time.
So naturally, you were able to find this ability to be able to find, you had an outlet.
I had an outlet.
You were able to escape.
I had an outlet. I loved that outlet. And, later on, when I discovered the drinking, I started acting out before then.
Talk about that.
Mom came back. I ended up living with Mom in the 7th grade. My best friend's dad ended up abusing me. And he got, after going to court for molesting 3 12-year-old girls, he got a year probation and $2.99 restitution. And I was just devastated because that's what the state of Colorado sent my mother. And I'm just getting angrier and angrier, and I would sip wine and stuff at this point, but it was, I wasn't an alcoholic yet. I hadn't drank alcoholically yet, but I was in school and I was starting to suffer because, when somebody's abused, they feel like it's their fault.
Okay.
And then later on, Mom moved us
real quick. So I think there's a lot of people that are listening that have experienced abuse.
Yeah.
And so tell me a little bit about, just from a high level again, because we can get into we can go down a whole thing around that. But what do you mean it feels like it's your fault?
If you take a kid and they go in the hospital and they've got bruises on them, they'll ask the kid what happened. I made Mommy, I made Daddy do it. I made Uncle something do it. I made, whatever. A child thinks everything revolves around them. And it's necessary. And we're responsible as adults to nurture them and give them a safe environment. Let them be heard, be protected, and to show them how things aren't their fault or what they do need to take responsibility for. But a kid always thinks if something bad happens to them that they're to blame. It's the nature of being that
I
child.
appreciate that.
And so I kept thinking, what did I do to make mom leave? What am I doing to make dad mad? What am I doing that my brother doesn't like me? He was just living his life. And, it just happened that they got divorced after I was born. It's just all the things.
But to internalize all that at such a young age is brutal.
It was brutal.
You know what I mean?
It was brutal. And I started to suffer in school in the 7th grade. I ended up, my mom divorced that second husband. We moved out to the suburbs, moved again. And by the time I went, it was in 8th grade, I had gone to 13 different schools. And we talked about
no stability.
It was just awful. And I hated, especially when I changed in the middle of the year, that was really rough. And I just never felt like I fit in. And that's typical for a lot of people. You don't have to have my story to have that. A lot of alcoholics and addicts feel that way. But then
that definitely doesn't help, though.
No, it doesn't help. And then I started getting involved in this church. I did start getting involved in a church in the middle of doing one of my 8th grade stints. And I was singing at this church. I got close with the music minister. He ended up abusing me. Nothing happened to him. And, but before that, when I had finally told my dad about my best friend's dad abusing me, he said he didn't believe me and that I was lying and I was a drama queen. And I think that was almost even more devastating than the abuse itself.
Sure. Oh, really?
Yeah, because of the fact I wanted him to protect me. And I thought, well, who is going to protect me? And I just remember my psyche just shutting down. And I'm like, where I had these dreams of saving myself for marriage and all this stuff. And I was never going to smoke, never going to drink. I was going to be this, just performer. And I wanted to do these things. I just started getting calloused. And I was like, I started acting out. I would go back and forth between mom and dad's house. I was stealing the cars. I was angry. I would get more attention for the bad behavior than I would for the positive.
All right, Hilary, so I want to ask you something that's, again, I want to be sensitive to this, but it's something I think is really important to talk about, and since there were so many instances where you were, sexually abused, can you provide some insight or some thoughts or, have you thought around like, how does a child, get put in so many situations like that?
I can say it's not being protected. What I've learned in all these places that go and find these predators, they find the right situation. You'll see them dress up as clowns. My best friend's dad had a playground in the back of his house that he built, this whole cool jungle thing you could jump on. The music minister worked with the kids at the church. I was walking around the apartment complex when I was 5 by myself because my 10-year-old brother was left to watch me, who was inside the apartment looking at television. That's not okay.
So would you say it really came down to this, there was no adult supervision?
No healthy adult supervision, because a predator is not...
Keyword healthy, right?
Yeah, not healthy, protective, all of those things. And what happens is they're very slick. They find the mark. And then what happens is I think there's a shame. I can't speak for everybody. I'm going to tell you, though. Kids are desperate for love, and there's nothing wrong with that. The adults have the power, and they have the power to abuse. I know men that could see a naked woman walking down the street and would throw a blanket around her. Then there's men that would attack her and rape her, okay? There's the difference. So, it's the psyche of the person. You can't blame the victim. I blamed myself because I thought, what is wrong with me? But then what happens? After you're abused like that, then you think, what is wrong with me? You have this deep-seated feeling that you are a piece of garbage to just be used, that you're not unworthy of any kind of love, that the sexual component of, it became this thing for me where if nobody cares about me and my body, then neither will I. I threw away my virginity. I ended up I threw away my virginity. And at this time, I started experimenting with alcohol. I was invited by these older girls. I was repeating the 8th grade, and they invited me to have shots of tequila.
How old were you?
I was 14. And I ended up, I was going to be cool. I was going to be Hilary. And, I threw that first shot of tequila back, coughed, they laughed. I laughed to be cool. And then, I keep going. And I had this brain that wouldn't shut up. I knew what you were thinking about me. It wasn't good. And, I just knew that whatever you're thinking about me, it's not good. I've got to be good enough. I'm not good enough. Blah, 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 blah. And then I had a cannon blast of anxiety through my gut. And it just was like, I was always, just nervous. But acting or singing would take me out of that. Right. And so, but I remember 8, 9 shots later, my brain got quiet. That hole sealed up and I felt warm. And it was like, I forgot about all that other stuff. And immediately I think, you know what? These girls are really smart to invite me to this little party.
Right.
And secondly, you know what? I'm kind of cute. I might look like Maureen O'Hara or Anne Margaret. And my skin is not pale. It is alabaster.
Well, so this is kind of summarize that first chapter of what you'd gone through. There was nothing that was ever done for you, though, as an individual.
No.
So we enter into the teenage years now.
We enter into the teenage years, and I ended up, I drank alcoholically, that with those shots of tequila. I wanted to feel that way for the rest of my life because it took away the crazy brain, the loud, horrible thinking, the anxiety in my gut, and the fears of tomorrow and the pain of yesterdays and todays. And I drank alcoholically probably a handful of times. My brother saw it, freaked out. They put me in adolescent treatment. I said all the things they wanted to hear back at Cure Unit in Mercy Hospital in Denver, Colorado.
Wait, so hold on, though. That's fascinating, though.
That's at 15. That took only like 6, 8 months to figure out I was alcoholic.
But what's fascinating to me, though, is that they were so willing to do something for you so quickly when you're struggling with alcohol.
Right.
But the child molestation
right.
and the abuse,
right.
it was pushed away.
Exactly.
Wow. I mean, why do you think that was, though? Why do you think they were so open to helping you with the alcoholism, but not the trauma?
I think it was, they were incapable. I think.
Or was it around the lack of knowledge or education around that back then?
I think it's a huge responsibility if somebody steps up to do that.
But for sure. But I also think the time, I mean, we're talking, 30, 40 years ago, right? I mean, I think the times were very different then.
They were. The courts were definitely different. I'm such a protector. I can't comprehend it. I can't comprehend telling a child I don't believe you.
Oh, I trust me. I'm on your
No. Yeah. And I did say fibs as a kid. Like I'd be scared of getting in trouble and then he'd get the truth out of me, but I had never made up anything like that ever. Like it was like, okay, did you go over here and do this? And I'd be like, no, Daddy.
Yeah, it wasn't. I'm not defending the time, saying that. I'm just saying in general that we're in a different era. You know what I mean?
Right.
We're in a totally different way things were looked at and approached. But it's just I find it, mind-boggling that it's like, hey, look, I was sexually, abused as a child, and nothing's being done. But hey, I'm again, and not to mitigate, or minimize substance abuse or drinking, but it's like, hey, I'm struggling with drinking. Okay, immediately we're going to get you help. You're going to go to treatment. I find that it's crazy.
Yeah, and back in those days, they put me there just hoping they would fix me. It wasn't like, hey, we're going to do this, and it was like you said, different times. I think, like I said, I don't understand completely. I can tell you that there were some miracles that happened later on concerning my dad, where he did believe me, and I can tell you about that in a bit. But, but there's situations, there's people I know whose parents, and our wonderful Joyce Meyer, she was abused by her father, and her mother stayed with him and blamed her. And that happens a lot, where the own father or stepfather abuses, and the wife stays and says, blames the daughter. I mean, I know people.
Why is that?
Because usually they have trauma and they're love addicted. They're addicted to that man.
They have their own issues. That
it's just a sick dynamic.
So looking at going into your teenage years though, right? So you're starting to drink, you're all this stuff, like you said, now you feel like you've made it. Now that you found, alcohol, it's taking you away from, the thought process, just the experience of the trauma. And where does this end up taking you?